Something that no one tells you about American urban legends is that a lot of them have police reports, very real ones. In 1955, two families in Kentucky called the cops because something was attacking their house and bullets weren't doing anything. Officers did show up, found shell casings on the ground, bullet holes in the walls, and broken windows. Physical evidence that something had absolutely gone down there. They wrote it all down and left with zero answers. That case is on today's list, and it's not even the strangest one. Welcome to Tier 2 of the American Urban Legend Iceberg. So tell me, have you ever played Red Dead Redemption 2 and seen an eerie train at night? I think Red Dead Redemption 2 gameplay is showing right now. Keith! Is it red? Oh, okay, thank you. Well, here we have ghost trains, or phantom trains, depending on who you ask. These are sightings of trains that should not exist. Trains seen on abandoned tracks. Trains heard but never seen. Trains that vanish before reaching a station, or trains that appear where tracks were removed decades ago. A lot of train talk. Witnesses describe headlights cutting through the fog, the sound of whistling engines, vibrations in the ground but no train, no wreckage, no conductor, no real explanation. These stories pop up all over the world, but they hit especially hard in places where railroads once defined daily life. Towns grew around tracks. People worked, traveled, loved, and died by trains. And when the rail lines vanished, the stories stayed. Some versions tied ghost trains to disasters, trains that crashed, trains that derailed, trains that never made it to their destination. Others are quieter, a train that appears every year on the same night, a whistle heard at the same hour, a light moving through an empty countryside. Skeptics will say it's a distant, real train carrying through the fog, or an optical illusion, or sound traveling unusually far at night, but like a lot of the Tier 1 legends that we've covered, the explanation really doesn't matter. Ghost trains work because they symbolize momentum. Momentum without purpose. Something still moving long after it should have stopped, and history refusing to shut down. It's not a monster, it's not a killer, it's not a conspiracy. It's just the unsettling idea that some events leave such a strong imprint they keep running their route, even when no one's left on board. If you were anywhere near the video game side or the horror side of the internet, specifically YouTube in like 2013 or 14, you're going to know this one. It's Polybus, or Polybius. I don't know. But Polybius is an alleged arcade game that supposedly appeared in Portland, Oregon in 1981. And it was placed in a handful of arcades for a very short period of time. And then it vanished without a trace. According to the legend, the machine caused intense psychological effects. Players experienced headaches, nausea, nightmares, memory loss, and even seizures. Some accounts even claim suicidal thoughts or personality changes. And here's where it gets Tier 2 creepy. It comes with kind of the Men in Black angle. Witnesses claim that mysterious men in black suits would come to regularly check the arcades. They didn't play the game, they just took notes and collected data from the machine. The implication, of course, is that Polybius wasn't entertainment, it was an experiment. A lot of popular theories indicate that it was a CIA or government psychological experiment testing subliminal messaging, reaction time, or stress responses. And it was possibly tied to Cold War era MK Ultra style programs. The game allegedly included flashing messages like obey or submit, high contrast visuals meant to overload the brain, and sound frequencies designed to induce anxiety or disassociation. And this feels possible because it isn't just the creep factor, it's the timing. Early 80s, arcade boom, very little regulation. Real government experiments on civilians did actually happen. MK Ultra is not just a theory, it's real. And there was no internet to fact check rumors. And the scariest part, there's no physical proof it ever even existed. There's not even definitive proof that it didn't exist either. Polybius is perfect Tier 2. It's mostly grounded in reality, it's possibly real, and it blurs fiction and history. It also escalates from a creepy story to an institutional paranoia story. Which, like I said, pretty fucking American. I said that last time with Skinwalker Ranch. I mean, government doing experiments on its own people, pretty American. And now we're getting into a topic that I personally watch a lot on YouTube, and that's Missing 411. Shout out to the Lore Lodge. They don't know me, but I know them. Missing 411 almost feels like cheating because it's basically a bunch of different urban legends kind of thrown together to form one big, massive conspiracy of sorts. It refers to a body of research compiled by a former police officer named David Paulides, who claims that thousands of people have vanished under highly unusual circumstances, primarily in US national parks, remote wilderness areas, dense forests, and mountainous regions. Paulides argues that these disappearances don't behave like normal missing person cases. The core pattern is that many victims vanish within minutes, often near trails, camps, or other people. Search dogs can lose the scent abruptly. Bodies are sometimes found in areas that have already been searched, occasionally at higher elevations than the victim could have realistically reached. Sometimes they're just missing clothes, like shoes or important gear. Victims often include children, experienced hikers, hunters, or even park rangers. This isn't just people got lost stuff, essentially, is what he's saying. He also points to what he calls clusters, specific regions where these disappearances seem concentrated. Places like Yosemite, the Rocky Mountains, the Great Lakes region, and the Appalachian Mountains. These clusters repeat across decades, suggesting a pattern rather than random incidents. But here's where it shifts from mystery into conspiracy. The National Park Service allegedly does not maintain a centralized missing persons database. Families report being stonewalled. Records can be difficult or even impossible to obtain, and some files are allegedly lost, sealed, or incomplete. Whether that's intentional or just bureaucratic incompetence, it fuels suspicion. Although bureaucratic incompetence is definitely a possibility in a government office, I would not be shocked. However, if you look at channels like Lore Lodge, which again, I like a lot and watch a lot, Paulides frequently gets details wrong and seems to push specific narratives. In some interpretations, that narrative leans into things like Bigfoot or other cryptids being responsible, which is where things get a little bit out there, a little bit insane, but that's okay. Lore Lodge does a really good job of breaking down these cases in detail, sometimes to an almost frustrating degree because you'll be into the mystery and they're like, and yeah, here's why it actually isn't weird and this is exactly what happened. You're like, damn it. But it's solid research. It's really good videos and really good content. If you really want to get into Missing 411, I'd highly recommend checking them out. But overall, this is tier 2, because these cases are pretty well known. A lot of people have heard about them, but you still kind of have to go looking for it and finding it in the right corners of the internet. It's a bit more niche than the mainstream stuff. The next one hits some incredible conspiratorial areas, and in my personal and very humble opinion, I think this one's pretty stupid, but a lot of people like it. So the claim is that Walt Disney, the creator of Disney obviously, was cryogenically frozen after his death in 1966 with the intention of being revived in the future once medical technology had advanced far enough. Some people say that his entire body was frozen, others claim that it was just his head, but it's supposedly stored somewhere in a secret Disney facility under Disneyland or Disney World. It has a little bit of background because cryonics was a real emerging concept in the 1960s. The first human cryonic preservation happened in 1967. Walt Disney died on December 15th, 1966, so who knows? He was also very obsessed with futurism, technology, and the future of humanity. That's why there's a Tomorrowland in Disney World and Disneyland. It was a really big passion of his. And this is the same guy who built Epcot as a prototype for the city of tomorrow.
The most exciting, the most important part of our Florida project, in fact, the heart of everything we'll be doing in Disney World will be our experimental prototype city of tomorrow. We call it Epcot.
So people always thought, if anyone would try this, it would be him. There's also the added part of the cover-up. A lot of people say that Disney released the movie Frozen specifically to bury search results, because if you looked up Disney Frozen before, it would talk about this conspiracy. But now it's Elsa, the soundtrack, merchandise, stuff like that. Is this the case? Probably not, but it is interesting. Disney has never publicly addressed the cryonics rumors at all. His cremation, which supposedly he was cremated, happened rather quickly, and his grave is modest and unassuming. Disneyland does have a vast underground tunnel system, which has fueled some speculation, but again, this one's probably not real. This one's probably not real at all. You can actually go visit his grave. They are interred at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. There's really no credible evidence, but this is an urban legend for a reason. And a lot of people do like this one, and I sort of get it. It's kind of fun. So now it's time for one of my favorite urban legends of all time, and really the entire reason I made this video, and that is the Bell Witch. So the Bell Witch is specifically an urban legend from 19th century Tennessee, so the 1800s, in the town of Adams between 1817 and 1821. The Bell family claimed that they were violently tormented by an intelligent and vocal entity, something far beyond your standard ghost story. It started with the boys of the Bell family, and this was a very big family, hearing scratching and gnawing at their bedpost every single night. They would get up, search the room, the sounds would stop, and then they'd go back to bed. But as soon as they did, it would start up again in a vicious cycle. Some people thought it was just a rat, but eventually it just kept getting worse. There was knocking on walls outside and inside the cabin, more gnawing, and sometimes even sharp bouts of pain inflicted upon the family members. Eventually, this entity seemed to either gather more power or just decided that it wanted to start talking, and it did. It knew details about people that it had supposedly never met. It was like a town gossip. It would also quote scripture, it would sing songs, it would mock prayers, and it would even physically assault family members. This is such an interesting story, and I'm really not doing it full justice because it's just not quite that style of video, but again, I would recommend Lore Lodge. They have a really good video on this, like an hour long. There's also a bunch of documentaries, but this is just such a weird and almost unexplainable case. And it's a very famous urban legend in Tennessee. But it's really creepy because eventually the witch, ghost, whatever you want to call it, started identifying as Kate or Katie Banks, who was a local woman rumored to have a land dispute with John Bell. Now, whether she was a witch or a scapegoat or just a completely unrelated name, and it was a coincidence, the entity did use her name and speak in her voice sometimes. And she showed a particular hatred for John Bell, leading credence to maybe this Kate was a witch who summoned this entity, or maybe it just saw an opportunity to do that. The entity really attached onto John Bell and the youngest daughter of the Bell family. Apparently, according to the legend, there was a marriage. The daughter was engaged to be married to a man, and the entity did not enjoy or did not like or just thought it was a bad match. Something, I don't know. It was just super duper against this marriage. Like, it was very famously like, no, you cannot marry that man. No way. No how. Which is strange because you'd think that a ghost wouldn't give a shit, but apparently it really did. John Bell was obviously for the marriage, and eventually there was a time where he supposedly contorted into like almost a ball shape, his back bending backwards, and it was apparently a really horrific sight. His son was there when this happened, and John Bell knew that he would die soon, that this thing was going to kill him. So one morning, he just doesn't wake up. He was poisoned. The doctors said he got poisoned, and they supposedly found a vial full of a black liquid that no family had really known about. So a lot of people think that the Bell Witch or Katie Banks or someone poisoned him that night. Today, the legend is tied to Bell Witch Cave, which is a very real location associated with the entity. Visitors will sometimes report nausea, disorientation, strange sounds, electronic malfunctions. Is it placebo or suggestion or just you're in a cave and your phone's not working? It could be all these things. But it is interesting that a lot of people have reported this same kind of experience. The Bell Witch is definitely one of the creepiest American urban legends, and it's extremely famous. Neighbors supposedly witnessed all these events. Guests were attacked, animals were harmed. The story spread so widely that there's even stories of Andrew Jackson reportedly visiting the Bell farm. That did not happen, but in the story, it says that Jackson left and his men were attacked by the Bell Witch, with a quote saying something to the effect of, "I'd rather fight the British Army again than deal with the Bell Witch." Now, the Andrew Jackson story is probably not a true story. In fact, I'm almost 100% certain that it's not true, but it shows how big of a deal this legend is. And it's really, really one of my favorites. And now we're back to the Cryptid gang with the Talipo, or Talipo. Quick aside, it was not supposed to rain today, and I just heard lightning strike right next to my window. It scared the shit out of me. I just want to put that out there. And while talking about the Bell Witch, it was like coming down. It was creepy. Very atmospheric for the video we're making. But yeah, we're back into the cryptid stuff with the Talipo. This is another one of those little Appalachian folklore southern creatures. And this sounds like a kid's story. It is not a kid's story. Well, probably, I don't know. Lizzie Borden is a nursery rhyme, so I don't know. The world's messed up. Apparently murder and death are just cool to tell kids about now. But most of these stories follow a similar structure. An old man lives in the woods alone. He is starving or sick or sometimes just really hungry. It doesn't really matter. One night, he sees a strange creature with a long body, glowing eyes, and a fat, meaty tail. The man then shoots it, cuts off the tail, and eats it. That's the mistake that leads into the story. That night, a voice begins calling from outside his cabin. Talipo, Talipo, where is my Talipo? The voice grows closer every single night. Then eventually, the creature comes back, wounded, enraged. But it's patient. Sometimes the man will hide. Sometimes he just locks the door. Sometimes the dogs guard the house, but it doesn't matter. In most versions, the dogs are killed, the door is forced open, and the man is dragged away, screaming. I remember hearing one version of the story where the man actually didn't get taken. He just woke up, he heard his dogs barking, he went outside, the dogs were dead. Tragic, I know, but it's always about the creature taking back what was stolen. So what is the Talipo, whatever. Descriptions can vary. Sometimes they say it's more bear-like, some people say it's more cat-like, some people say it's humanoid, something that walks upright but moves wrong, that kind of thing. The most consistent part is the tail. A lot of people have different depictions of what this creature is. But the Talipo is a moral horror story. It's about not taking what isn't yours. Don't overtake in nature, because once you cross a line, sometimes there's no undoing it. There's no redemption, and there is no mercy. That being said, kind of shitty, because the setup of the story is the guy is starving and about to die, and if that's the case, I think you're allowed to eat. I'll be honest. I think you're allowed to shoot something and eat it, but that is the goal of the story. It's a conservationist effort. So yeah, make of that what you will. So the next one is pretty big. I'd argue it's even classic, but it's so fucking played out to me. And this, okay, I have a gripe with this one. And I'll get into it in just a second, but I think this is the most boring, basic, stupid urban legend of all time. And I've heard it a million times. I've never once been interested. Even when I was a kid and all this stuff was like new and crazy to me, I never found this one interesting. I've always just sat there and been like, yeah, okay, whatever. And that's, of course, the Black-Eyed Children. Black-Eyed Children, or BEKs if you're a hipster, are the modern urban legend that really took off in the mid-1990s, mostly in the United States, partially in the UK. Most of the stories are pretty consistent. It's normally a late-at-night witness alone in a car, at home, whatever. Sometimes they knock on the door, sometimes it's just a child standing nearby. Normally it's two kids, usually through ages like 6 through 14. They will politely ask you for help. Maybe they want to use a phone or get a ride. Come inside because it's so cold outside. Their voices are flat and calm, but there's just something off. And that's when the person notices their eyes. They're completely black. No whites, no pupils, just a void. The rule they can't break, and here's the detail that pushes this past normal creepy pasta stuff, is that they never enter unless invited. Very vampire-esque. Witnesses report overwhelming feelings of terror or dread or the urge to flee, probably because these children have black eyes. I don't blame them. Physical symptoms like nausea, dizziness, again, because you're seeing something with black eyes, and your brain's like, yeah, no, get the hell out of here, obviously. It's just, yes, like, you want to get away from the children with black eyes. And even when nothing overly threatening is happening, people feel a primal urge to not let them in, obviously. I just feel like this one's pretty simple, you know? But it's one of those stories that, one, probably isn't real, but two, it gets described in this way like it's the scariest thing ever. And I just felt this urge not to let this happen. Like, no shit, I wouldn't either. It's obvious. But it doesn't matter. The stories have always had something else going on. Electronics malfunction, because that's always a thing now. Pets will act aggressively or just hide. Witnesses will fall ill or have nightmares for weeks or months, which, if you feel that level of dread, yeah, that can happen. There's no real explanation for BEKs. Some people say demons or vampires, aliens, government experiments, interdimensional beings, which is just aliens with extra steps, something pretending to, well, be human. They mimic manners, but not emotion, language, but not warmth. It's just dumb, in my opinion, but the legend works because it weaponizes the trust of children. They're supposed to be safe, harmless, instead it's something off. But what is kind of neat is that the black-eyed children don't chase you. They don't threaten you, they just ask politely, and when you don't do anything, they just stand there. So yeah, that's black-eyed children, and we can move on to something more interesting. Okay, so the next one is so cool, and it's way better than black-eyed children. It's called the Hopkinsville encounter. And this is one of those cases where the details are weirdly specific that even skeptics kind of have to pause for a second. This is also known as the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter, and it took place in 1955, which, for whatever reason, is where a ton of these stories pop up. Post-World War II, Cold War paranoia, UFO boom, it all just kind of lines up. But this one is very different, because it's not just a sighting. It turns into a full-on gunfight, which is so American. So 2 families, 11 people in total, including adults and children, are staying at a farmhouse in Kentucky when things start going wrong. Earlier that night, a bright object streaks across the sky and lands somewhere nearby. Later on, a small humanoid creature approaches the house. And the descriptions are really pretty consistent. It's about 3 to 4 feet tall, large glowing eyes, pointed ears, long arms, thin legs, metallic or silvery looking skin, and it didn't really walk, it kind of just floated or glided along. Now, these things weren't aggressive in a normal sense, they were just kind of there, watching. So naturally, being Americans, they did the most American thing possible. They grabbed shotguns and rifles and just started shooting. Multiple times, at close range. And according to the report, the creatures were hit directly, knocked backwards, and then just got back up. No blood, no injuries, no nothing really. They would just recover and then they disappeared into the darkness. This went on for hours, a literal siege of the house. Eventually, the families freak out and flee to the local police station. Police then come back to the farmhouse and find shell casings everywhere, bullet holes, damaged doors and windows, but no bodies, no creatures, and no spacecraft. Literally nothing. Which is exactly why the case never really died, because something clearly happened. It just doesn't make sense what it was. So, locals started calling them the Hopkinsville Goblins, which is kind of funny and just undersells how weird this whole thing is. Which is exactly why I opened the video with this encounter. Yes, that first anecdote I read was this story. It could be considered really creepy, but they're just so funny looking that it just devolves it into being the silliest thing I've ever seen. It's kind of awesome in that regard. I love it. And what makes it even more interesting is that it kind of sits right between 2 worlds. UFO encounter on one side, old Appalachian goblin or forest creature folklore on the other side. So what was it? Aliens, misidentified animals, small case of mass hysteria, PTSD from the time period, or just some little goblin dudes that can tank shotgun blasts and walk it off like it's nothing. Who knows? But it's so funny. Okay, now for the next one on our tier list, we have The Babysitter and the Man Upstairs. This one is pretty foundational, it's quiet, it's simple, and it's one of the most famous urban legends ever. It inspired a lot of stuff too. Scream, Black Christmas, pretty much every creepy phone call horror trope you can think of. So the story normally goes like this. A teenage babysitter is watching children late at night in a large house, usually for some rich suburban family type thing, but then the phone rings. She answers, and a man on the other end calmly asks, "Have you checked on the children?" Immediately creeped out, she hangs up, and a few minutes later, the phone rings again. "Have you checked on the children?" This happens again and again. Each call is calm, patient, and almost mocking. Eventually terrified, she calls the police. They tell her to keep the caller on the line long enough so that they can trace it. The phone rings one more time. She answers, "Have you checked the children?" She keeps him talking. Then the police call back and tell her to get out of the house immediately, because the calls are coming from within the house. And that's the reveal that made this story legendary. After that, the endings sometimes change depending on the version. Sometimes the baby escapes. Sometimes the children are already dead. Sometimes the killer chases her out of the house. and sometimes nobody survives. But the core fear always stays the same. The danger was already inside. It was not coming, it was already there. And that's why this one works so well. It isn't just a ghost or cryptid or some little goblin creature tanking shotgun shells. This one's very plausible. People babysat all the time, especially in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Big suburban homes, landline phones, isolated neighborhoods, teenagers left alone for hours. These things happen. The story directly attacks the idea of home being safe. And unlike a lot of urban legends, this one actually evolved with technology. Before caller ID and cell phones, tracking a call took time. So the setup genuinely worked at that era. And culturally, this one exploded because it hit every fear imaginable. Isolation, responsibility, vulnerability, the idea that someone could already be inside your safe space without realizing it. Just trying to goad you into doing something so they can get you. And honestly, it's a lot scarier than half the monsters on this iceberg. The next one is called the Lost Dutchman Mine, and before doing the research on this list, this is probably the first one that I've never really heard before. But it's a legendary lost gold mine, supposedly hidden somewhere in Arizona's Superstition Mountains, just east of Phoenix. And unlike a lot of treasure legends, people genuinely keep dying while looking for this one. Also, Superstition Mountain, that's gotta be bad vibes. Like, that's gotta be some bad vibes. But anyways, the legend centers around Jacob Waltz, a German immigrant who was mistakenly called Dutch. I guess that just happens sometimes. But he'd supposedly discovered an incredibly rich gold vein in the mid-1800s. A lot of people believed it because he was known to carry exceptionally pure gold. He never revealed the mine's location, and on his deathbed in 1891, he allegedly gave cryptic clues, but no map that anyone could reliably follow. And once he died, the hunt began. There's no verifiable evidence that the mine was ever found, even though some people have spent generations searching for it. Historians disagree on whether Waltz ever actually discovered a genuine source of gold at all. Some accounts say he arrived in town carrying high-grade ore, while skeptics point out the lack of reliable newspaper reports from the period. But that didn't stop people from trying, and unfortunately, a lot of people did die in this process. Superstition Mountains are no joke. Extreme heat, almost no water, cliffs, maze-like canyons, and magnetic rock formations that can apparently really badly mess with compasses. But the danger doesn't explain everything. Over the decades, some searchers have literally just vanished. Bodies have been found beheaded, skeletons have turned up with bullet holes, and some hikers have simply disappeared without a trace. Some deaths are exposures, sure, but some definitely don't seem accidental. Most people don't accidentally get shot or accidentally get beheaded, for sure. There's also the rumors of an Apache curse. Some Apache tribes warned settlers that the mountains themselves were cursed. Legends speak of guardian spirits, thunder beings, maybe like the Thunderbird, I don't know, could be, and punishment for those who seek forbidden gold. The belief is pretty simple. The mountain does not want to be taken from. Whether you buy the curse story or not, the death toll keeps these stories alive. And there's also what I'd like to call the almost found it problem. People constantly claim they were just inches away. Someone will find an old mine shaft, a gold sample, old tools, and then they just die, or disappear, or just never make it back. It's definitely one of the more interesting ones on this list, and honestly one I kind of want to research more after making this, because I like a good lost treasure story. Next we have the skunk ape, and this one's really cool, and very stupid. So the skunk ape is basically Florida's Bigfoot. It is literally supposed to be Bigfoot, but instead of the normal Bigfoot, it has black hair, and a white stripe, and apparently it smells absolutely horrific. Sightings go all the way back to the early 1900s, and the descriptions are pretty consistent. 6 to 7 feet tall, broad shoulders, long arms covered in dark brown or sometimes reddish hair with white streaks in its hair. The skunk ape is supposed to move very quickly through the swamp terrain while emitting this overpowering, sulfuric, rotting smell. People often say they smelled it before they ever saw it, which is interesting because if you look into like some demonology stuff, that is something that comes up a lot, that kind of sulfuric smell and smelling it before you see it. And honestly, Florida makes this one kind of scarier. The Everglades are hot, wet, miserable, and feel almost impossible to search completely, and there are places out there that humans straight up just do not go. They're also gross. And there's always that one guy on YouTube sprinting into the swamp, grabbing alligators and giant snakes with his bare hands. And every time I see it, I just think, like, no way. No chance would I ever... You wouldn't catch me doing that. But unlike a lot of Bigfoot sightings, skunk ape encounters sometimes happen near roads, homes, or farms. It doesn't always stay deep in the wilderness. There's also some pretty famous evidence, sort of. The most cited photos came out in the early 2000s, when a woman claimed that she photographed a skunk ape near her home in Florida. Now, I've heard conflicting reviews on that. Sometimes I hear the woman actually did send it off. Sometimes I hear it's an anonymous person sent it to the sheriff's office. I don't really know, but the image is pretty famous. It shows this large, hairy, upright figure peering through the weeds, looking in like a residential area type of thing. Skeptics will say it's a guy in a costume, or maybe even an escaped orangutan. But no costume was ever produced, and no exotic animal was reported missing. So it just becomes another weird little mystery. Now, explanations for the skunk ape range from undiscovered primates, relic hominids, escaped exotic animals like we just mentioned, swapped adapted cryptids, or just hoax culture going way too far. Personally, I think it was someone messing with people, but the skunk ape is still pretty famous. It's Bigfoot's weird, humid Florida cousin, and that earns it a spot on this iceberg. The next one is an actual classic, and I realize I say that a lot, but all of these are pretty classic. I mean, they kind of have to be in the top 2 tiers, but this one is really classic because it inspired one of the most famous horror movies ever made, Amityville Horror. And that, of course, is the Amityville Haunting. So, the Amityville Haunting refers to the infamous house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York, widely known as the site of the 1974 DeFeo family murders and the subsequent alleged paranormal events popularized in Amityville horror. And honestly, this one is pretty fascinating because unlike a lot of these stories, the horrific crime part is 100% real. That happened. So in November of 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. murdered 6 members of his family inside the house. Parents, siblings, the entirety of the family. He later claimed that he was influenced by voices telling him to kill them, although his stories did change repeatedly over time. The murders shocked the suburban Long Island community and became national news, which is pretty understandable. Again, it's a horrific situation. Then, about a year later, Kathy and George Lutz moved into the home with their children. Which is insane, by the way. A year after an entire family gets murdered in a house, you're just like, oh yeah, seems fine. Oh, he was hearing voices that told him to kill his entire family? Surely that's not going to happen to me. I'm built different. But almost immediately, the Lutz family began reporting disturbing phenomena. Strange odors, cold spots, slime oozing from the walls, which could just be an indication that the DeFeos were smoking. Strange noises, doors slamming, and eventually claims of demonic activity. The family only lasted 28 days before fleeing the house entirely, claiming it was haunted, which makes sense. And then the story exploded. Enter Ed and Lorraine Warren, probably the 2 most famous paranormal investigators in American history. They investigated the house and claimed it wasn't just haunted, but infested with inhuman entities. Not ghosts, but something demonic. Photos from their investigation, especially the infamous Ghost Boy image, only fueled the legend more. And this is where the modern Conjuring-style paranormal universe really starts to form. But here's the thing. The house, now, seems absolutely fine. Later residents reported nothing unusual. Some witnesses contradicted themselves. Critics will argue that the Lutz family exaggerated or even fabricated parts of the story for money. There were lawsuits and book deals that followed behind their experience. But there's also the very real possibility that this thing got massively dramatized. But even skeptics admit the murders themselves happened, and some detail between accounts line up just enough to keep the story alive. So, was the haunting fake, or was it just exaggerated? Was the crime itself the only real horror in the house, or did something happen in that house that pushed events into a certain direction? And that's what makes Amityville such a lasting urban legend. Because unlike some random goblin in the woods, this is a suburban home, a normal looking place. And whether it was demons, trauma, paranoia, or one of the most successful paranormal hoaxes in American history, people still talk about it almost 50 years later. Okay, now we're on to the next story, and this one is very interesting to me. And honestly, I think it's way cooler than the other haunted doll that we won't talk about right now. And that one is Robert the doll. Robert is a real physical object that you can actually still go see today. He's currently housed at the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida, which is also, fun fact, home to the first Margaritaville, so you can knock out 2 birds with 1 stone. The doll originally belonged to Robert Eugene Otto, known as Gene, in the early 1900s. And this thing was huge. Borderline life-size. He had a little sailor outfit and a weird expression on his face, the whole shebang. Very, very interesting. The doll was possibly handmade or imported from Germany, and according to the story, it was given to Gene as a child, possibly by like a servant or maid. And almost immediately, things got weird. According to the family and some neighbors, Gene treated the doll like it was alive. People claim they heard 2 voices coming from his room at night. Gene talking to the doll, and a second voice supposedly talking back. Oftentimes, furniture would move, objects would disappear, and whenever something bad happened, Gene would allegedly blame Robert. Neighbors even claimed that they would see the doll moving between the windows when no one else was home. Some people said its facial expression would change. Others claimed it would move positions on its own. Now eventually, Gene grows up, but he keeps the doll. As an adult, Gene reportedly gave Robert his own room. He would seat him at the dinner table and talk with him like a regular guy. He would also get genuinely very angry if anyone disrespected the doll. And this all kind of reminds me of this one random person I saw in Louisville, Kentucky on a riverboat who carried a life-size Chucky doll around and treated it like a real person. And it was one of those moments where you know you should look away, but you just can't. It's like watching a car crash. It's like, wow. And no disrespect to her, obviously, just it was deeply strange to me. But the point is, this weird attachment people have to these dolls apparently does happen more often than you'd think. Now eventually Gene does die and the house gets sold. And according to the new owners, the same weird stuff starts happening. Which raises a very important question to me. Why do you keep the doll? Like at any point, you know you can just throw Robert in the ocean and call it a day, right? But no. Someone decided, yeah, let's keep the creepy life-size sailor doll. Eventually, Robert ends up donated to a museum, which makes more sense, but that's where the legend really evolves, because now visitors are reporting weird experiences. People will say they feel dizzy or sick near the display. Cameras will malfunction, objects will move, some people claim they got scratched, and most importantly, people who mock Robert or photograph him without permission later claim they experience horrible luck afterwards. Accidents, job loss, relationship problems, and apparently so many people dealt with this that they actually wrote apology letters to Robert that the museum literally displays alongside the doll, which is honestly hilarious and horrifying at the same time. And because every haunted doll story eventually circles back to this somehow, Robert also gets connected to Chucky and Child's Play all the time, which again makes me think back to that girl carrying the giant Chucky doll. Maybe it's all connected. Maybe not. But either way, Robert the Doll is one of the most famous haunted object stories in America for a reason. And honestly, unlike some other haunted dolls, this one at least has a funny personality. But we can go ahead and move on to the next story. So the title of the next one, a little bit of a trigger warning here, I guess. It's gross. I don't really like it. It's Baby in the Oven. And this is one of those classic cautionary tales, most commonly told in the United States or the UK. Usually framed as a friend of a friend told me type of story. There's no ghost here, there's no demons, no monsters, just something catastrophic caused by a simple misunderstanding. There are a few different versions, but the structure usually stays pretty similar. A babysitter, often young or inexperienced, is left alone with a baby. The parents give some vague instructions or something just gets misunderstood, then something goes horribly wrong. In the most common version, the babysitter mistakes the oven for a crib or misunderstands a joke or instruction about putting the baby in the oven. So the babysitter puts the baby in the oven and obviously the baby dies. Authorities arrive to the scene that feels almost too absurd to process. Some versions involve a language barrier. Some involve a mental disability. Others are just about panic and irrational decision making. But no matter the setup, the ending always stays the same. And honestly, it's what makes this story so unsettling, is that it's not supernatural. It's not. It's not about monsters, like I said. It's just incompetence. It plays on the fear of trusting the wrong person, leaving children in the care of strangers, miscommunication, and the terrifying realization that common sense is not universal. Now, is this based off a real event? Not exactly. There's no single confirmed case that perfectly matches the urban legend, But there are unfortunately real cases involving severe negligence and accidental child deaths involving babysitters or caretakers. And over time, stories like that just kind of blur together. And that's how a lot of these urban legends form. A real tragedy becomes a retelling, then that retelling gets exaggerated, and eventually it becomes folklore. And honestly, that's why this one really sticks with people. Because unlike a ghost or a cryptid, this one feels horrifyingly possible. But yeah, that's the story of the baby in the oven. So anyways, the next story. So this one is Cropsy. Cropsy is a long-standing urban legend from Staten Island, New York, and it's been told for decades, mostly to scare children out of staying out of the woods and away from abandoned buildings. But Cropsy did not stay fictional, and it did not stay legendary. In the earliest versions of the story, Cropsy was a burned or disfigured man, often carrying a hook, axe, or knife, and he was supposedly living in tunnels, abandoned buildings, and deep in the woods. He was known for kidnapping children. Parents would use this story as kind of a warning. Don't go near the abandoned asylum. Don't stay out after dark. Don't wander into tunnels. Don't wander too far into the woods because Cropsy will get you. This is all classic urban legend stuff. But then in the late 20th century, something deeply uncomfortable happened. Children on Staten Island actually started disappearing. And eventually investigators focused on a man named Andre Rand. Rand was a former employee at Willowbrook State School, which was an institution already infamous for abuse, neglect, and medical experimentation on disabled children. And honestly, Willowbrook itself could probably be its own entry in this iceberg. Rand lived on abandoned hospital grounds, and he reportedly used underground tunnels. He was eventually convicted of kidnapping and murder. And I also want to point out this, as I was saying that part out loud, my lights flickered. Did not like that. Not fun. But anyways, what makes Cropsy so disturbing is that the myth existed first. Then reality sort of just filled the shape of the legend. People didn't invent Cropsy because of the crimes, they recognized him afterwards. And that's horrifying. Because suddenly the story the parents told their kids to scare them into behaving was not just a fake monster anymore. It was close enough to reality to become attached to a real human being. And that collision between folklore and true crime is explored in the documentary Cropsy from 2009. The documentary examines how this Staten Island urban legend about a child-snatching madman slowly merged with real disappearances and real fear. And honestly, that's why this one really sticks with me. Urban legends are often communities processing fear. That's just kind of what they are. And Cropsy became a container for very real trauma. The line between monster and man just slowly disappeared. So at that point, you kind of have to ask yourself what's scarier, the legend or the fact that reality got close enough to fit inside that legend. So the next story is the dead man's hand, and this one refers specifically to a poker hand. 2 black aces and 2 black eights. This hand is infamous for one reason. A certain man was holding it when he died. On August 2nd, 1876, legendary gunslinger and lawman Wild Bill Hickok was playing poker in Deadwood, Dakota Territory. Now Hickok notoriously hated sitting with his back to the door, but that day he didn't really have a choice because that was the only seat that was open. Later that day, a man named Jack McCall walked up behind him and shot him in the back of the head. Hickok died instantly, as most people do when they get shot in the back of the head, but according to the legend, he was still holding his cards. And in that hand, there was the ace of spades, the ace of clubs, the 8 of spades, and the 8 of clubs. Now the 5th card is where the legend fractures a little bit. Some people say it was a queen, some say it was a 5, some say it was never properly recorded, but honestly it doesn't matter, because the hand became legendary. And it became legendary because Wild Bill Hickok himself was already legendary. From there, the hand evolved into a symbol of bad luck, a symbol of doom. Aces and 8s became cursed. It became shorthand for someone being marked for death, and the story spread absolutely everywhere. Saloons, dime novels, westerns, pop culture in general. It's one of these things where people who don't even play poker probably have heard the phrase dead man's hand before. But what makes this one interesting is that it sits in a weird space between history and mythology, because the shooting itself is completely real. Wild Bill Hickok absolutely died in Deadwood, but the exact details of the cards mostly come from eyewitness testimony. And poker hands were not exactly lodged as forensic evidence back then, obviously. Hell, investigations back then weren't exactly the pinnacle of modern science in the first place. So now we have to ask the question, did the hand make the death legendary, or did the death make the hand cursed? Who knows? But either way, it's one of the cooler pieces of Wild West folklore out there, and honestly, Wild Bill Hickok is just a really cool guy in general. Definitely a cool guy. Okay, so this next one is so near and dear to my heart because it's one of the first urban legends that I really remember living through as a kid. This all happened in 2016, and if you were old enough to remember this or young enough to really experience the way I did, then you will really remember this story, but that's of course the clown sightings of 2016. Now I can tell you a little bit about my own personal experience in this. I was in, I think, 7th or 8th grade at the time, which I'm dating myself a little bit there. But you start seeing this stuff on social media. Instagram, Twitter, at the time it was called Twitter. All this other stuff about these clowns that just keep showing up. And you start seeing different posts, and sometimes actual media outlets would pick up on it. Then there was YouTube videos. So many YouTube videos. Reddit posts. Stories of clowns just walking around. And I remember reading about this one haunted house story. Now I don't know if this is actually real or it's just another urban legend, but it was huge at the time. There was this haunted house attraction, clown themed, and people walking through it see what they think is a prop, a dead guy and a clown eating him. And they think it's disturbing, but like, hey, that's what haunted houses are supposed to do, right? They're supposed to disturb you. But they leave and they tell the staff like, hey, that section was a little much. Like that was a lot. The staff supposedly responds with, what the hell are you talking about? And then the story goes that they found out it wasn't a prop. There was a homeless man dressed up as a clown who had killed someone and was eating them inside the haunted house. Again, no idea if it's true, it's probably not, but in 2016, stories like that spread like wildfire. And that's what made the whole thing feel so creepy. Then there were all the videos. I remember one very, very vividly. Some people were driving down a road late at night, there's a clown just standing there. These guys are like, what the hell's going on? And then the clown starts chasing the car.
Right after us. Hit it! Hit that bitch! Hit that!
Stuff like that was everywhere. And at the time, as an 8th grader, that all felt extremely real. Now, obviously, as an adult, I realized most of this was people screwing around for attention. But back then, no way. It was terrifying. At my school, someone even made a fake Instagram account pretending to be one of the clowns. And it got a little dark. They were posting pictures of dead animals, roadkill, posting weird, threatening messages about attacking the school. And I also remember all those posts talking about the clowns have waited in the shadow long enough and that on some specific day they were all going to come out. No one knew what that meant. Everyone assumed it was bad. And honestly, the whole thing created this weird atmosphere where everyone was kind of freaked out, but a little excited, like a collective adrenaline. And I know that sounds crazy, but that's kind of how I've always been like when tornado warnings happen, part of me is terrified, but the other part of me is like, oh hell yeah, this is crazy. So the clown thing felt a lot like that. Scary, but weirdly exciting. But the actual history of this happening is kind of fascinating. In the late summer/fall of 2016, reports started spreading across the United States of clowns appearing in places they should not have been. At first, people just thought it was isolated pranks, but then it just kept happening. The earliest major reports came out of South Carolina. People claimed clowns were lurking near the woods, near apartment complexes, some trying to lure children into the forest. Police initially dismissed most of this as rumors or hoaxes, but then similar reports started popping up again everywhere. Clowns started standing silently near tree lines, clowns waving from the woods, clowns appearing near schools, clowns posting threats online. Most of them did not actually attack anyone, they would just stand there, which is honestly kind of creepier to me. And then social media got involved. And once social media got involved, the whole thing detonated. Schools would go into lockdown, parents would keep children home, police departments started issuing public statements, people began patrolling neighborhoods. Some people actually went clown hunting. I went clown hunting as an 8th grader. That's just what people did. And eventually things escalated. People got assaulted, but it's not the people you think that would get assaulted, it was the clowns. People would dress up like clowns, just random ass people. And then someone would think they're in on this clown thing, and they would just get their asses kicked. It was crazy. The panic itself became dangerous. Now, there's a bunch of theories as what caused all this. Some people blamed the upcoming release of the movie It, which came out the following year and had a massive marketing push. Others think it was just copycat pranks that spiraled completely out of control, which is probably the absolute truth of it all. Some people said it was social media hysteria feeding in on itself, people wanting attention, bad actors using the chaos as cover, but no central group was ever identified, there was no mastermind, no big reveal, no payoff. The whole thing just faded away. The clowns were already unsettling, but 2016 weaponized that fear. It felt random, directionless. Anyone could do it, you couldn't predict it. And if it was a joke, you might not realize it until it was too late. Or maybe it wasn't a joke. So yeah, that's the clown sightings of 2016. A very vivid memory for me. One of the first legends I remember living through in real time. There was rumors that there was a clown on a street next to mine, and there was like a whole bunch of stuff. But it was a really, really interesting time to be alive. The next story is something you've probably heard before, even if you didn't know it had a name. This one is called The Boyfriend's Death. Sometimes it's called The Hook, sometimes it's called Lover's Lane, and this is one of the oldest teen cautionary horror legends out there, long before slasher movies came around and made everything louder and flashier. Usually the story goes something like this. A young couple parks their car late at night, somewhere secluded. Lover's Lane, a forest road. Some isolated pull-off where teenagers go to make out, or just get away from people. Then the radio interrupts the music with a warning. An escaped killer is on the loose. In some versions, the killer has a hook for a hand. In other versions, he's just a dangerous serial killer. The couple will get nervous. Sometimes they argue. Sometimes the boyfriend wants to stay. Sometimes the girlfriend wants to leave. But eventually, the boyfriend gets out of the car to check a noise. Or confront something outside. Or maybe get help. But then he doesn't come back. Minutes pass. The girlfriend waits. She gets scared. She locks the doors. And eventually she hears a sound. It's slow, rhythmic, scratching. Over and over and over again. She calls the police, and when they finally arrive, they tell her not to look up. Because her boyfriend had been killed. He was hung from a tree above the car. And the scratching sound was his shoes brushing against the roof. Now that's a horrifying image, and honestly that's why the story works so well. It's not really a jump scare, it's realization horror. The danger already happened. You were sitting right next to it the entire time without realizing it. And that delayed understanding is what sticks in people's heads. Now granted, there's a bunch of variations of this story. Sometimes the boyfriend doesn't die. Sometimes the couple escapes, and sometimes they don't even know anything happened. They just drive away and only notice later that a bloody hook was hanging from the car door handle. Meaning that the killer got that close. We talked about that in the last video, the hook for a hand. These stories do get kind of meshed together quite a bit. But honestly, the story is very good because it feels very plausible. Because stuff like this genuinely did happen. More than a couple times. I mean, think about the Zodiac Killer. That was basically his entire MO. People, secluded road, he'd go out, kill him. His whole modus operandi. But yeah, this story spread because there's a real fear underneath it. A lot of these stories were absolutely cautionary tales aimed at teenagers. Don't stay out too late. Don't go to Lover's Lane. Don't go to have premarital sex. All that classic moral panic stuff, but at the same time, isolated places were actually dangerous. Especially in certain eras. And that's why this legend has lasted, because underneath the campfire story structure, there's a very real possibility buried in it. And honestly, that is scarier than most monsters. Okay, so the next one is a French name. I'm not French, I am obviously very American, and I might mispronounce this one, and if I do, I'm sorry. But we have the Nain Rouge. This story is extremely Midwestern, and I'm not from the Midwest, so I don't know every little detail, but the thing is tied directly to Detroit, the good old Motor City. Go Lions, that's my favorite NFL team. Dan Campbell is my hero. But the Nain Rouge is basically this legendary creature associated with Detroit going all the way back to the early 1700s, back when the city was still just a French settlement. And unlike a lot of folklore creatures, the Nain Rouge doesn't really attack people. Its whole purpose is basically to show up before anything terrible happens, which immediately makes it feel very Mothman adjacent. Descriptions vary a little bit, but most versions describe it as a short, humanoid, red or reddish, wrinkled, almost goblin-like looking guy. Sometimes it wears old-fashioned clothes, sometimes it looks a little more animalistic, but it's always described as something deeply unpleasant to look at. And the weird thing is, it doesn't normally do anything. It doesn't chase people, it doesn't attack, it just kind of appears. And then afterwards, something bad will happen. So the Nain Rouge is basically Detroit's personal harbinger of doom. Sightings have allegedly been linked to fires, riots, economic collapse, disease outbreaks, political upheaval, all kind of disasters. Which honestly makes this a little more unique cryptid-type legends because it functions less as a monster, more as an omen. The most famous story involves Antoine de la Mothe Cadillac, the founder of Detroit. Apparently, he encountered the Nain Rouge and was warned not to antagonize it. But then, because humans are apparently incapable of listening to warnings in folklore stories, he antagonized it anyways. Some stories have him literally trying to beat it to death with his cane, which is really funny. Soon afterwards, his fortunes collapsed, he was imprisoned, and Detroit itself struggled through many disasters. From that point on, the Nain Rouge became this symbol of impending ruin hanging over the city. But honestly, the modern part of this story is my favorite, because Detroit eventually just embraced the legend. There is now something called the Marche des Nains Rouges, where people will literally dress up and symbolically chase Nain Rouge out of the city every single year, which is kind of awesome, because it's basically a giant communal exorcism mixed with a parade and probably a lot of drinking. And whether you believe in the creature or not, I think the ritual itself says something really interesting. People don't stop telling stories like this because they think every single detail is literally true. They tell them because cities, communities, and cultures like having symbols for fear almost, especially places that have struggled. Detroit has had fires, riot, economic collapse, corruption, depopulation, all kinds of hardship. And the Nain Rouge becomes this weird folkloric embodiment of it all. Like if bad luck itself had a mascot. And honestly, I think that's why this one sticks around. It's not really about a goblin. It's about a city trying to laugh in the face of disaster. So we're finally hitting the last thing in tier 2, and the last story for this video is going to be Momo, or more specifically the Momo Challenge. And this one's really modern compared to just about everything else we've talked about. This is not an old campfire story, this isn't some Appalachian creature, this thing was born completely online. And it exploded in 2018 and 2019. Now personally, this one was a little after my peak terrified internet child era. I think I was in like the middle of high school when this thing got huge, so by that point I mostly looked at this and said, alright, that's fucking stupid. But at the same time, it did become a real moral panic. Schools were talking about it, parents were freaking out, police departments issued warnings, even news channels covered it. And unlike older chain email urban legends, this one spread entirely through modern social media. Instagram, WhatsApp, YouTube, Twitter, Reddit, all of it. And the actual face of Momo comes from something very real. It was a sculpture. It was a sculpture called Mother Bird, created by Japanese artist Keisuke Isao. And no offense to you, Keisuke, but what the hell is that thing? Like genuinely, what am I looking at? Do you need help? Because that sculpture is horrifying. It has these huge bulging eyes, this unnatural stretched smile, this vaguely human face attached to this weird bird-like body. It doesn't even look human. It doesn't look like an animal. It just looks wrong. And obviously the internet saw that image and immediately ran with it. The actual Momo Challenge legend claimed that Momo would contact children through messaging apps or videos, and then she would issue escalating dares. Refusing them would supposedly lead to threats, and completing them would lead to increasingly dangerous tasks, sometimes involving self-harm or worse. Things like choking yourself, hurting yourself, sneaking out at night, things like that. Really awful stuff. And because it targeted children specifically, parents panicked immediately. Schools would send home warnings, police departments would issue statements, parents monitored their kids' phones, and social media amplified the whole thing at light speed. But here's the important part though, there was never any verified evidence that the challenge existed in the way that people would claim. No confirmed deaths were ever tied directly to Momo. Most of the evidence was screenshots, reposted images, fake messages, recycled stories, or just outright hoaxes. Now, there absolutely were bad actors online who did use this panic to troll children or just scare people. That part is very real, but Momo itself was not some supernatural internet monster hunting kids through YouTube, obviously. But what makes this one interesting is that it perfectly reflects internet era fear. Because unlike Bloody Mary or Bigfoot, you don't have to go somewhere creepy to encounter this. The horror comes straight to you, straight through your phone. And that's why this thing spread so effectively. Parents didn't understand the internet that much. Kids were spending more and more time online than ever. Algorithms constantly pushed scary content, and suddenly this horrifying face was everywhere. It kind of reminds me of Slenderman in a weird way, and not necessarily because of the details, but because both of them represent internet folklore becoming real enough to affect people psychologically. In a way, it's fascinating because urban legends used to be spread through campfires, playgrounds, and sleepovers. Now they spread through algorithms. And Momo might honestly be the first major urban legend that's fully belonged to social media. And yeah, that's gonna wrap up tier 2, and honestly, this video did end up way longer than I had expected. I don't know how long exactly, because future editing magic will determine that, but I imagine this thing's pretty massive. But genuinely, thank you all for watching. I know I'm still a really small channel, I'm still working a full-time job, I make these videos because I find this stuff fun and interesting. So the fact that people actually sit down and watch these genuinely means so much to me, and hopefully, I can get the next part out relatively soon, because trust me, the deeper levels of this iceberg get way weirder. Thank you again for watching, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you all in part 3 of the American Urban Legend Iceberg. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.